The day after the memorial service, my husband's daughter placed a manila envelope on the kitchen table like she was doing me a favor. I want to start there, not at the funeral, not at the hospital, not at the beginning of the 18 years I spent building a life with Raymond. I want to start at that kitchen table. Because that's the moment everything I thought I understood about my own life got quietly, deliberately dismantled. Her name was Diane. She was 42, a real estate attorney in Portland. And she had her father's eyes. The same deep-set gray that could look warm or cold depending entirely on what she wanted from you. That morning they were cold. She'd flown in the night before. And I'd made up the guest room out of habit. Out of the same instinct that had guided me through 18 years of trying to be the kind of stepmother that didn't make anyone uncomfortable. She hadn't thanked me for the room. "There's no easy way to handle this," she said, sitting down across from me without being invited. Her brother, Christopher, was already in the living room. I could hear him moving around in there, opening drawers, doing a slow inventory of a house that wasn't his. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug. "Handle what?" Diane pushed the envelope toward me. "Dad's estate. We need to begin the process." The envelope contained documents I didn't immediately understand, legal language layered over legal language. Page after page of provisions and distributions and allocations. What I did understand was my name. It appeared 3 times in the entire document. Each time, it was attached to a number. $30,000. That was what 18 years of my life, 18 years of building a home, managing Raymond's household, supporting his career, caring for him through 2 surgeries and a cancer diagnosis, had been assigned as its value. $30,000 and a polite suggestion that I begin making other living arrangements within 60 days. "This can't be right," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Raymond and I talked about this. He told me I would be taken care of. He was very specific." Diane's expression didn't change. "Dad made those promises before the estate was reorganized. The financial picture is more complicated than you may have realized." "What does reorganized mean?" Christopher appeared in the doorway. He was 38, built like a man who'd peaked in college athletics and never quite let go of that identity. He had none of Diane's sharpness, but he had a particular talent for making cruelty sound like practicality. "It means Dad's assets were restructured over the past couple of years," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "The properties, the investment accounts, the business interests, they've been consolidated under a family trust that Diane and I are co-trustees of. You weren't included in the trust because, legally, you weren't part of the original family structure." Original family structure. As if 18 years of marriage was an administrative footnote. "Raymond included me in his planning," I said. "I was with him at every meeting with the estate attorney. I signed documents." "You signed documents related to household accounts," Diane said. "Raymond's broader estate planning was handled separately, through a different firm." She said this with the careful tone of someone reciting a prepared answer. And something about the precision of it made my stomach tighten. "What firm?" "Hartwell and Associates," Christopher said. "Downtown. They've been managing his business interests for years." I knew the name. Raymond had mentioned it occasionally, usually in passing, never with any detail that suggested it concerned me. I'd trusted that. I'd trusted him. "And the house?" I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Diane's jaw shifted slightly, the first crack in her composure. "The house transfers to the family trust. We're not going to rush you, Colleen. 60 days is reasonable." 60 days. To pack up 18 years. To vacate the house where Raymond had held my hand during his chemotherapy appointments. Where we'd eaten breakfast every morning for nearly 2 decades. Where his reading glasses were still on the nightstand because I hadn't been able to move them. "The $30,000, I said, "is that a final number?" "It reflects what was available in jointly held accounts," Christopher said. "The estate itself is held by the trust. Those assets aren't subject to spousal claims under the terms Raymond established." "Spousal claims." He said it like I'd been trying to steal something. I looked at them both, Diane with her careful legal face and Christopher with his practiced indifference, and I understood with sudden clarity that this had been planned. Not improvised after Raymond's death. Planned. The language was too precise. The answers came too quickly. They'd rehearsed this conversation. I'll need to speak with an attorney, I said. Of course, Diane said pleasantly. That's completely reasonable. We'd expect nothing less. She said it in a way that suggested she wasn't worried. Not even slightly. After they left, Diane back to her hotel. Christopher to whatever measuring and cataloging he'd been doing in my living room. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. The afternoon light moved across the floor the way it always had. The same angle, the same warmth, completely indifferent to the fact that nothing else was the same. Then I got up and went to Raymond's study. Not to grieve. I'd been grieving for 7 months. Since the diagnosis. Since the first surgery. Since the afternoon in February when the oncologist had used the word terminal in a voice that was professionally gentle and personally devastating. I'd been doing my grieving in hospital waiting rooms and kitchen sinks and in the dark at 3 in the morning for months. I wasn't going to do it now. I went to Raymond's study because I needed to think. And thinking was something Raymond had always done in that room. Maybe some of that would still be in the air. His desk was organized the way he'd always kept it, not neat exactly, but intentionally arranged. Everything in a place that made sense to Raymond even if it didn't always make sense to me. I sat in his chair and looked at the surface. Folders, a yellow legal pad with notes in his handwriting, a glass paperweight shaped like a lighthouse that I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. And beneath the legal pad, barely visible, a corner of something that didn't belong. A photograph, face down. I pulled it out. It was a picture of Raymond and me, taken at a small inn on the Oregon coast 3 years ago. We were standing on a cliff above the water, and Raymond was laughing at something I'd apparently said, and I looked happy in a way that felt almost naive now. The happiness of someone who had no idea what was coming. On the back, in Raymond's handwriting, for when you need to remember what's real. I turned the photograph over and over in my hands. And then I noticed what had been underneath it, a small brass key on a plain ring. With a piece of paper folded around it. The paper had 2 things written on it. A bank address on Morrison Street, and the number 214. Raymond had left me something he didn't want Diane or Christopher to find. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name was Patricia Okafor, and I'd known her for years. She'd done some work for the nonprofit I'd managed before I married Raymond, and we'd stayed in loose contact since. She was 60 years old and had the calm, unhurried manner of someone who'd seen every variety of human disaster and found most of them manageable. I sat across from her desk and laid out everything Diane and Christopher had told me. Patricia listened without interrupting, her hands folded, her expression carefully neutral. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. You said Raymond assured you repeatedly that you'd be provided for, she said. Many times, including 2 weeks before he died. And you were present for estate planning meetings? Some of them. He said the others were about business restructuring. He said it wasn't something I needed to worry about. Patricia's expression shifted, not dramatically. Just a slight tightening around the eyes. The trust Diane described. The one administered by Hartwell and Associates. When was it established? She said it was set up over the past couple of years. And Raymond never mentioned transferring the house or primary assets into a family trust? Never. She wrote something on her legal pad. Colleen, I have to be honest with you. What you're describing raises significant concerns. Not about the legality of the trust necessarily. Family trusts are common estate planning tools. But the manner in which you're being presented with this information. The speed of it. The fact that you weren't made aware of these structures during the marriage. That's concerning. Can I contest it? Potentially, depending on when the trust was established and what Raymond's mental state was. There may be grounds to challenge. But I need to tell you, these kinds of contests are expensive. Slow, and emotionally brutal. Diane is an estate attorney. She will know every procedural delay available to her. I looked out her window at the street below. A woman was walking a dog, moving at the easy pace of someone with nowhere urgent to be. I found something, I said, a key, in Raymond's study, with a bank address. Patricia looked at me. Have you used it? Not yet. She leaned forward. Before you do anything, before you sign anything or agree to anything or make any public statements, go to that bank. Even if I decide not to fight them? Especially then. She studied me carefully. Colleen, in my experience, when a spouse leaves a hidden key 2 weeks before they die, they're trying to communicate something they couldn't say out loud. Whatever is in that box is going to matter. I called Christopher that afternoon. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. Colleen, have you had a chance to look over everything? I have, I said. I want you to know that I've decided not to pursue any legal challenge. The pause on his end was about half a second too long. That's very wise. I think, for everyone involved. It's just not how I want to spend whatever time I have left. I said. Raymond always believed that holding on to anger was more destructive than letting go. I'm trying to honor that. Another pause. He would appreciate that. I'm meeting with Patricia Okafor tomorrow to review the paperwork. I said. I just want to make sure everything is clear before I sign. Of course. Take whatever time you need. His voice had the quality of someone trying very hard not to sound relieved. Diane and I just want this to be as smooth as possible. For everyone. After I hung up, I sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen. Then I got my coat and drove to the bank on Morrison Street. Safety deposit box 214 was in the lower level of the bank. In a room that smelled of cold metal and old paper. The bank officer, a young man named Andre who'd been kind and efficient without being intrusive, left me alone with the box after verifying my identification. I sat down at the small table and lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a letter in Raymond's handwriting. Addressed to me. I set it aside. He'd have wanted me to read the other things first. I was certain of it. The second thing was a flash drive with a piece of tape on it that read audio files. Listen before anything else. I didn't have a way to play it there, but I took note of it. Third was a folder labeled Hartwell, Internal Documents. I opened the folder. What I read over the next 45 minutes felt like watching a building I trusted collapse in slow motion. The documents were email exchanges. Printed and dated. The oldest was from nearly 2 years ago, a message from Diane to someone named Preston Hartwell, the principal of Hartwell and Associates. The subject line was Dad's health update and timeline. Preston, the prognosis isn't good. The oncologist gives him 12 to 18 months. Possibly less. Christopher and I need to move forward on the restructuring we discussed. Can you accelerate the timeline? The priority is ensuring the residential property and the primary investment accounts are captured in the trust before any complications arise. His wife doesn't understand the business side and won't push back if the process looks routine. I read it twice. His wife doesn't understand the business side. Diane had written that, about me, to her father's attorney, while Raymond was still alive. The following messages were worse. A step-by-step outline of how the family trust had been constructed to exclude me from any meaningful inheritance while appearing. On the surface, to comply with Raymond's expressed wishes. A conversation about the $30,000 figure. Enough that she can't claim abandonment. Not enough that it matters. A note from Preston Hartwell advising Diane that Raymond had asked, twice, about provisions for Colleen and had been told the language was being finalized. It had never been finalized. Raymond had been asking about me, and his attorney and his children had been stalling him while quietly locking me out. The next document in the folder was a private investigator's report, dated 8 months ago. Someone named Terrence Webb, licensed investigator, retained, and this was where I had to stop and breathe for a moment, retained by Raymond. Raymond had hired an investigator. The report documented Diane's professional misconduct, 3 client complaints filed with the Oregon State Bar, one of which involved allegations that she had steered a vulnerable elderly client toward estate arrangements that significantly benefited Diane's own referral partners. The complaints had been resolved quietly, but the pattern was documented. Christopher's section was longer. He ran a private equity firm in Scottsdale that had experienced significant losses over the past 3 years. More troubling was a section documenting that Christopher had twice borrowed money against assets that weren't entirely his, including funds from a joint business account he'd shared with Raymond. Accessed after Raymond's diagnosis, when Raymond had been too ill to actively monitor his accounts. $340 had moved from that account to Christopher's firm during the final year of Raymond's life. My hands were shaking when I reached the last document in the folder. It was a financial statement for an account at a private wealth management firm I'd never heard of. The account was held in my name alone. The balance was listed as $3.9 million. Raymond had been moving money for months. The note attached to the statement. In Raymond's careful handwriting. This is yours. Colleen. It always was. I was trying to keep it safe until the right moment. I found the letter last. My Colleen. If you're reading this, then you found the key. And you've read everything else. Which means you're already beginning to understand what I could never figure out how to say out loud. I suspected what Diane and Christopher were planning for more than a year before I died. I didn't want to believe it. I kept finding reasons to think I was wrong. That I was being paranoid. That the illness was making me see patterns that weren't there. Terrence Webb showed me I wasn't wrong. I couldn't confront them directly. I was too sick, and they have too many lawyers. And I knew that if I made it obvious I understood what they were doing, they would accelerate everything and leave you with even less time to respond. So I did what I could. The house has a mortgage on it that Diane doesn't know about. I took it out 6 months ago, $900 against the property. The money is in the account I set up for you. The investment accounts they restructured into the trust? The bulk of those had already been moved before the restructuring. What they captured is roughly $600 in assets with $800 in associated liabilities. They're not inheriting wealth, they've inherited a problem. The real document, the one that governs my actual estate, is held by a woman named Sylvia Park at Meridian Estate Law on Burnside Street. I engaged her 11 months ago. After I first understood what was happening. She has instructions to contact you. If you're reading this before she reaches out, call her directly. The real document leaves everything to you. The trust Diane and Christopher set up is valid, but it only governs the assets that remained in it at my death, which, by then, was substantially less than they expected. They're welcome to those assets and the debts that come with them. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you more simply. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I was afraid that knowing would change how you looked at them. And I didn't want to take that from you before I had to. You were the best part of every day. Colleen. Every single one. Asterisk all my love. Raymond. I sat in that small room for a long time. Then I dried my face, put the letter back in the folder, and took everything that mattered with me. In the parking lot, my phone showed 2 missed calls from Diane and a text from Christopher. Colleen. Just checking in. Diane and I were hoping to connect tomorrow if you're available. We want to make sure the transition feels supportive. Supportive. I typed back. That sounds fine. I'll be in touch. I had 1 call to make before tomorrow. Sylvia Park answered on the 3rd ring. Sylvia Park's office was on the 4th floor of a quiet building off Burnside, and it looked exactly like the kind of place where important things were handled without any need to advertise it. Her bookshelves were organized. Her desk was clear. She was 65, with short silver hair and the bearing of someone who had made a long peace with difficult truths. I was wondering when you'd call, she said, settling into her chair. Raymond told me you'd find the key eventually. He said you were more resourceful than you let on. He was being generous. He was being accurate. She opened a folder on her desk. Let me explain where things stand. She spent the next hour walking me through Raymond's actual estate structure, the real architecture. The one Diane and Christopher hadn't been allowed to see. The account in my name. The mortgage on the house. The investment funds that had been quietly rerouted before the family trust was finalized. What remains in the trust, Sylvia said, amounts to the house with the outstanding $900 mortgage, a brokerage account with approximately $580 in assets and $720 in margin debt, And Raymond's interest in a commercial property in Tacoma that has been in litigation for 3 years and is likely worth nothing until the lawsuit resolves. So they've inherited. I began. Net liabilities of approximately $400 after asset valuation. Yes, she said this without evident satisfaction, but with the directness of someone stating a simple fact. If they accept the inheritance, they accept the debt. If they decline, the assets revert to the estate, which under the terms of Raymond's actual will, belongs to you. And the will, Raymond's real will, it supersedes the trust document? The trust governs only what's in it. Raymond's will governs everything outside of it, including the transfer of those assets to you. The trust itself is valid. It just doesn't contain what Diane and Christopher think it contains. She paused. Raymond was very careful. He didn't do anything that could be challenged as fraudulent. He simply exercised his legal right to move his own assets before his death. I thought about what Raymond had written. I did what I could. There's one more thing, Sylvia said. She slid a document across the desk. Raymond instructed me to present you with a choice. You can accept the inheritance as it stands and say nothing. Diane and Christopher discover the reality of their inheritance when they begin the distribution process, probably in about 3 to 4 weeks. Or, she placed a second document beside the first. You can execute this. The second document was a deed of gift, transferring the house and the commercial property to Diane and Christopher directly. If I give them the property, I said slowly, they take the debt with it. That's correct. But they'd also have to acknowledge the gift legally. Acknowledge that I was in a position to give it. Sylvia's expression showed something that was almost amusement. They would sign a document confirming that Colleen Whitaker, Raymond's surviving spouse, had the legal authority to transfer those assets as gifts, which implicitly confirms that the estate documents Diane prepared were not, in fact, the governing instruments. Raymond thought of that. Raymond thought of everything. She leaned back slightly. The choice is yours, Colleen. Letting it play out naturally is arguably cleaner. But the gift document would create a public record that tells the story unambiguously. I looked at the two documents. Then I thought about Diane's face at the kitchen table. The prepared answers. His wife doesn't understand the business side. I want to give them the property, I said. I had dinner with Diane and Christopher 2 nights later. Diane had chosen a restaurant in the Pearl District, the kind of place with small portions and large prices that was designed to signal sophistication. She'd reserved a private room in the back. Christopher was already there when I arrived, nursing a cocktail and scrolling his phone. The meal itself was a performance. They were gracious and attentive and used words like transition and moving forward and what Dad would have wanted. Christopher asked about my plans. Diane mentioned, with studied casualness, that she'd heard there was a lovely retirement community in Beaverton. I listened and nodded and ate my food and gave them nothing to read. Over dessert, Diane slid an envelope across the table. We had our attorney prepare a final transfer summary. She said, just to make everything clear and official. Once you've signed, we can release the insurance payout to you. Insurance payout. I thought about what Sylvia had told me. Raymond had 2 life insurance policies. One that Diane knew about, worth $85. One she didn't, worth $350. I've actually been working with an attorney as well, I said pleasantly. Something moved through Diane's expression, so quick it was barely visible. Of course, that's completely understandable. She's prepared some documents for me, too. I opened my bag and placed Sylvia Park's business card on the table, followed by a single-page summary that Sylvia had prepared, an overview of what was actually in the family trust and what was not. Christopher picked it up first. I watched him read it. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at his sister. And the look they exchanged was nothing like the controlled, rehearsed communication I'd seen before. This was raw. This was 2 people realizing simultaneously that the floor they'd been standing on was not solid. This isn't, Christopher started. It's accurate, I said. Raymond moved most of the liquid assets before the trust was finalized. The house has a $900 mortgage that was taken out 6 months before he died. The brokerage account carries more debt than it holds in value. Diane's face had gone very still. This isn't possible. We had an attorney review everything. Preston Hartwell reviewed what Raymond allowed him to see. I said. Raymond had a second attorney. He engaged her almost a year before he died. You knew about this? Diane's voice was careful, controlled, but something underneath it was fracturing. I found out recently, after you delivered that envelope. Christopher set his drink down. His hand was not entirely steady. So what does this mean? It means the trust you set up governs assets worth less than the debts attached to them. I kept my voice even. You're welcome to accept the inheritance as it stands. The properties, the accounts, everything that's in the trust transfers to you exactly as your documents specify. Along with the debt, Diane said flatly. Along with the debt, yes. A silence settled over the table. The sounds of the restaurant, other conversations, the clink of glasses, soft background music, continued on the other side of the wall as if nothing unusual was happening. Alternatively, I said, reaching into my bag again, I've had a deed of gift prepared. I can transfer the properties to you directly. As a gift from Raymond's estate. You'd own them free and clear. With full title. The mortgages and debts would be resolved from other estate funds. Diane's eyes sharpened. She'd heard the angle. She was an estate attorney. She knew what a deed of gift meant legally. Why would you do that? She asked carefully. Because I want this finished. I said, and because Raymond wanted me to choose. He left that choice specifically to me. What do you get from this? Christopher asked. The rest of the estate, which Raymond's actual will leaves to me in full. I looked at him steadily. Raymond was very thorough. Another silence. Diane picked up the deed of gift and read it carefully. She read it the way she'd been trained to read documents, slowly. Looking for the catch, the clause that turned it against her. She found it on the second page. I watched her eyes stop moving. Watched her jaw tighten. This requires us to execute a confirmation of your standing as beneficiary. She said, her voice neutral in a way that was costing her something. Acknowledging that the estate is governed by Raymond's will rather than the trust document. Yes, I said. That's not something we'd typically. It's required for the gift to be legally valid. I said, Sylvia drafted it that way specifically. You can have your own attorney review it. Of course, I'm not in a rush. What I didn't say was, your own attorney is the person who helped you build a structure to steal from your father. I'm not sure how much his review is worth. Christopher looked at his sister. Diane. I heard her, Diane said. The silence that followed was the longest yet. I need to make a call, Diane said finally. Standing, she picked up her phone and her bag and walked toward the back of the room. I heard her push through the door. Christopher and I sat together. He was staring at the table. He knew, Christopher said. It wasn't a question. He knew for over a year. I said, he hired an investigator. He documented everything. Christopher closed his eyes briefly. The $340. From the business account. Yes. He knew about that too? It's in the investigator's report. Christopher was quiet for a moment. Is there going to be legal action? That's not my decision to make alone. I said, Raymond left that to my discretion. He nodded slowly, the motion of someone absorbing a weight they hadn't expected to carry. He was sick for a year and a half and he spent that time building all of this. He was protecting me, I said, the same way you should have been. The word should hung there between us. He didn't argue with it. Diane came back 10 minutes later. She sat down. She placed both hands flat on the table. We'll sign the deed of gift, she said. The signing happened 3 days later. At Sylvia Park's office on Burnside Street. Diane had brought her own attorney. A careful-looking man named Gerald who spent 30 minutes reviewing every document before he let her touch a pen. He found nothing to object to. There was nothing to find. Christopher signed without speaking. Diane signed, then looked up at me across the table. Something in her expression was difficult to name. Not remorse exactly. Not anger anymore. Something closer to the particular exhaustion of someone who has been found out. Raymond loved you, she said. It came out quiet and strange, like something she hadn't entirely intended to say. I know, I said. He loved us, too. I know that as well. She looked down at her signature. I handled this wrong. From the beginning, I told myself it was just practical. Just protecting family assets. Keeping things in order. But I knew it was wrong. She paused. I knew what we were doing. I didn't say anything to that. There was nothing that needed saying. Gerald gathered the documents. Sylvia notarized the final page. Somewhere in that process, the estate of Raymond Whittaker was settled. They were gone within the hour. I sat in Sylvia's conference room for a few minutes after, looking out the window at the street below, at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon moving along without any awareness of what had just happened in this room. Sylvia came back in with 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it. Tired, I said, and something else, something that doesn't quite have a name. Relief. Sometimes. Doesn't feel the way you expect it to, she said. That might be it. I wrapped my hands around the mug. Raymond spent the last year of his life doing all of this. Meetings, documents, investigations, moving money, while he was sick. While he was sick, she confirmed. And he never said a word to me about it. He told me, Sylvia said carefully, that he couldn't bear to have you spend that time being frightened. He said you'd given enough of yourself to fear. He wanted to give you something else for those last months. I thought about the last year. The drives to the cancer center. The evenings reading together. The way Raymond had held my hand with the same quiet steadiness he'd always had. Even when his hands were weaker. The way he'd sometimes looked at me with an expression I hadn't been able to interpret then. I thought I understood it now. He'd been keeping a promise. 4 months later, I was living in a small house in Astoria, at the mouth of the Columbia River, where the water changed color depending on the light and the fog came in every morning like a slow announcement. I'd bought the house in cash. I had more than enough left over for the rest of whatever came next. I heard about Diane through Patricia Okafor, who kept in occasional contact. The bar complaint that had been quietly resolved had been reopened. One of the affected elderly clients had retained new counsel and the matter was now significantly less quiet. Diane's practice was under review. Christopher had stepped down from his firm. The $340 discrepancy had been discovered during an unrelated financial audit. His attorneys were negotiating something. I didn't need to know the details. In Astoria I found a rhythm I hadn't known I was looking for. I walked in the mornings along the waterfront. I learned to identify birds by their calls. I enrolled in a bookbinding class at the community center and turned out to be surprisingly good at it. Patient work. Careful work. The kind that required you to pay attention to small things. One afternoon I got a call from a woman named Helen, who ran a financial literacy program for women navigating divorce and widowhood. She'd heard about me through Sylvia Park. She wondered if I'd be willing to come and speak to her next cohort, not about the details of my situation, but about what it meant to understand your own financial life, what it meant to ask questions even when you were told not to worry about it. I said yes. Standing in front of that room, 12 women, various ages, various circumstances, all of them carrying the particular weight of financial uncertainty that no one had prepared them for, I understood something I hadn't expected. Raymond had given me more than money. He'd given me the story. The full shape of it. From the kitchen table to Sylvia's conference room to this room. With its folding chairs and fluorescent lights and 12 women who needed to know that I don't understand the business side did not have to be a permanent condition. I went back the following month. And the month after. The Raymond Whittaker Financial Literacy Fund was formally established 6 months after the estate was settled. It offers free legal consultations and financial education for widows and women in family financial disputes in the Portland metro area. It wasn't the legacy Diane and Christopher had planned to build with Raymond's name. But it was exactly the one he would have chosen. I want to ask you something before I go. Have you ever been in a situation where you were told to sit down? Stop asking questions, and accept what you were given, And you believed, even for a moment, that they were right? That maybe you didn't understand enough, hadn't earned enough, weren't entitled to more? I spent 18 years being quietly, politely managed. I'm not angry about it now. I'm something better than angry. I'm certain that the most important thing anyone can do for themselves is understand exactly what they have, exactly what they're entitled to, and exactly what they're worth. Raymond understood that. He spent the last year of his life making sure I'd have the chance to understand it too. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has reached. And if any part of it feels familiar, stay until the very end of the next video. I think it might change something for you.